Ever wonder what life was really like in the Middle Ages? It wasn't all knights and castles. It was a complex pyramid of power built on the backs of millions. Let's break down who was who in this fascinating world. At the very bottom were the serfs. Before the sun even rose, they were out in the fields, plowing, sowing, and repairing fences that weren't even theirs. They were bound to the land, unable to leave, marry, or sell property without their lord's permission. In exchange for protection and a small hut to live in, they owed days of unpaid labor and heavy taxes. A serf's entire world was often just the manor's fields. Each week, they had to work on the lord's personal land, the demesne, and only after that could they work on their own small plots to feed their families. They weren't slaves, but they certainly weren't free. Their lives were chained to the same piece of soil for generations. Still, life wasn't completely bleak. Faith, community festivals, and family offered small moments of joy and color in an otherwise hard life. The serfs were the foundation of the entire medieval pyramid, the hands that fed everyone above them. Without their constant labor, the whole system would have collapsed. Just a step above the serfs were the free peasants. At first glance, they looked almost identical. Same rough tools, same calloused hands. But one crucial thing set them apart: freedom. They could move, bargain for better terms, or even leave a lord's land entirely if they chose. Instead of providing forced labor, they paid rent, sometimes in coin, but often in crops or livestock. This freedom gave them choice, and choice meant opportunity. Some free peasants became prosperous yeomen, owning their own farms and even hiring others to work for them. They lived simple lives, but with a dignity that serfs lacked. No master could force their hand or dictate their future. In a world still deeply rooted in feudal custom, these free peasants were a quiet but powerful sign of change. They marked the slow shift away from a system of service and obligation toward a modern money based economy. Now, let's talk about the low clergy, the monks, parish priests, and nuns who lived among the common people. They were often poor in wealth, but incredibly rich in authority. These were the people who baptized newborn children, heard confessions from the dying, blessed marriages, and buried the dead inside monastery walls. Monks spent their nights copying books by candlelight, preserving ancient knowledge that even kings and nobles often couldn't read. They brewed ale, tended vast gardens, and provided charity to the poor. Their words shaped how entire communities understood sin, salvation, and justice. Most of them lived humble, devoted lives. Of course, the church's immense power could also lead to corruption, but even when they were flawed, the local clergy held tremendous sway. In a time when heaven felt very close and hell felt even closer, the word of a parish priest mattered just as much as a nobleman's sword. Away from the castles and fields, a new kind of power was rising in the bustling towns and cities. These were the burghers, the merchants, skilled craftsmen, and guildmasters. They built their fortunes not from land, but from trade and skill. In booming cities like Bruges, Florence, and Lubeck, the streets rang with the sound of hammers from workshops and the constant chime of market bells. Guilds were powerful organizations that controlled prices, ensured quality, and managed apprenticeships, turning specialized skills into stable careers. A clever merchant could easily earn more than a knight, And in the city, money, not birthright, was beginning to determine a person's rank. The rise of the burghers changed Europe forever. They challenged the old nobility with coin instead of swords, and they financed kings and their armies. New trade routes replaced old feudal roads, and gold started to replace grain as the true measure of power. They weren't warriors or lords, but in the end, their accounting ledgers would reshape the world more than any battle ever could. And what about the knights, clad in shining steel and mounted on powerful war horses? The knight was the armored face of medieval military power. They trained from childhood, learning to fight, ride, and live by the code of chivalry, though in reality, few truly followed its noble ideals. In return for land and the favor of a lord, they pledged their loyalty and military protection. But knighthood wasn't just earned through valor on the battlefield, it was often bought through wealth. A single suit of plate armor could cost as much as a small village, meaning many knights owed their status more to their family's fortune than to their faith or courage. Medieval manuscripts, like the Maciejowski Bible, show the brutal truth of their world. Lances shattering on impact, swords biting through chainmail, and battlefields soaked in blood. To the peasants, knights were both protectors and oppressors. To kings, they were the essential tool of rule, loyal when rewarded, but dangerous when ignored. Beneath the romantic ideals of chivalry lay a brutal world built on strength, honor, and the iron will to survive. Above the knights and local priests were the high clergy. Bishops and abbots were powerful figures who controlled vast lands, collected tithes from everyone, and served as key advisors to kings. Their magnificent cathedrals rose higher than any castle, powerful symbols of divine authority made from stone. The church owned a staggering share of Europe's land, and with that land came immense wealth and even private armies. It wasn't uncommon for a bishop to ride into battle under a banner of the cross, or for an abbot to command hundreds of men. They sat on royal councils, had the power to crown monarchs, and could even decide which wars were considered holy. For the common peasant, a priest offered the key to salvation. For powerful rulers, a bishop offered legitimacy and divine approval. The high clergy stood between heaven and earth, holding the keys to both, and they wielded that power like a weapon. Next were the great nobles. These were the king's most powerful subjects, the dukes, counts, and barons, who ruled entire regions like their own private kingdoms. Their massive castles loomed over valleys and rivers, constant reminders that land meant control. They collected their own taxes, held their own courts of law, and commanded their own armies of knights. In theory, they all served the king, but in reality, many were strong enough to openly challenge him. France's powerful barons forced their monarchs to sign charters, much like England's Magna Carta, limiting royal power. Civil wars often erupted over issues of pride, territory, and inheritance. The loyalty of a single great noble could decide the fate of an entire realm. Their word alone could summon hundreds of men to war or crush a peasant revolt overnight. They were both the foundation of the crown's power and its greatest threat, bound by oaths that could easily be broken with the swing of a sword. Finally, at the very top of the pyramid stood the king. He was seen as the source of all land, law, and loyalty in the kingdom. Every manor, every title, and every knight's sword ultimately traced its authority back to him. The king ruled by divine right, claiming his authority came directly from God himself. But in the real world, his power depended just as much on his strength and cunning as it did on faith. Strong kings, like England's Edward or France's Philip II, could bend the powerful nobles to their will. Weak kings, on the other hand, often became prisoners in their own courts, controlled by the very barons who were supposed to serve them. Royal coronations were grand ceremonies that blurred politics with religion, where the anointing with holy oil made a mortal man seem sacred. The king's justice settled disputes, granted land to his followers, or took it away from his enemies. He was the ultimate symbol of the entire feudal order, a single man standing atop a complex chain of oaths, armies, and obligations. When a kingdom fell, it was often said that the crown itself cracked first. That's all for this video. We've journeyed from the muddy fields of the serf all the way up to the king's throne. If you enjoyed this look into medieval society, feel free to subscribe for more releases each week. Thanks for watching.